Good morning to everyone here in Toronto, and good evening to those of the panel who are in Asia. We have one additional member of our panel, Dr. Fred Hu, the founder and chairman and CEO of Primavera Capital Group, a Chinese-based global investment firm. And here you can see them all on the screen. Good morning and good evening to you all. It's a pleasure to see you. You're surrounded by a lot of like thinkers who have got the same question in mind, which is, where do we go from here? The pandemic has been an extraordinary period, and the best opportunity that we can take coming out of this is this topic of the panel, which is the new prosperity. What are the ingredients that we can create for this new prosperity? So what I have done, because it is both an in-presence and a virtual meeting, is I have invited each of the panelists to spend a couple of minutes just framing the definition of new prosperity, the challenges perhaps the panelists see that are before us, and what the opportunities are. So if I could begin, Mary, with yourself in JP Morgan, what is your sense, if you have an opening comment or two, and then I'll take it around the rest of the panel before we get to questions.
Well, David, thank you so much for having all of us here. I think it's, as part of JP Morgan, we're honored to be participating in what I think is a really important dialogue, especially on the heels of COP26 and everything that's going on in the world. We've all, for the first time ever on the planet, all experienced something together, irrespective of where we stand in the world. And so I think this panel is a really special one to have the U.S., Europe, Southeast Asia, and China all represented in one, and it's and hopefully it will be able to talk about the different things happening around the world. As we were getting ready as a panel, we were talking about the differences of where we all sit, and yet the commonalities of what we've all been through. And so, as part of JP Morgan Chase, for the last 20 months, it's been, it's been a very eye-opening experience to watch what's happened around the world. It was a little nerve-wracking as we went through the first couple of months, particularly in the markets. My job as responsible for the asset management business is to ensure that the retirement assets of people are managed and taken care of. And when the markets swoon, you get very uncomfortable with that. And remarkably, as we stand here in November of 2021, we've had very few scars from the market environment. And general portfolios all around the world have been very, very healthy. And so people have participated in markets. They participated in the recovery. And it's an exciting time for the markets to think about how the world recovers. And importantly, what's the purposeful side of investing? And so during the time where many of us spent more time on Zoom than we did doing any other things, much of my time was spent on Zooms with His Royal Highness Prince Charles. And Philippe just mentioned the convening power of His Royal Highness and the Magna Carta and everything that they're working on. And I just think it's been a very important time for people to think about what's our responsibility as asset managers, as investors, as people who are working through these issues in the world, and how do we think about what it is that we need to do to help people to invest purposefully, to think about the planet, to think about climate, to think about social issues. So at JP Morgan, we've done a number of things. We've sort of doubled down on our efforts across social issues. We have a $30 billion racial and equity equality investment that we've already started to make all across the world. Everything from job training to hiring, to prison reform, to lower income investments, to Black and minority investments, women investments. And so just very purposeful investing on the front of what we can do as a global institution all around the world. And then I think as far as part of my role is to make sure that the investors around the world, the individual investors, can also express themselves. We've been making investments in companies that allow you to express that yourself. And I think a topic that everyone's talking about, ESG, the irony is the E, the S, and the G are three different things. They're not one thing, and somehow they all get lumped together. There are equity and equality things that are important, environmental things that are important, social things that are important, governance things that are important, but all of them together have different meanings depending on where you stand in the world. And so one of the things we're trying to do at JP Morgan is to make sure that each individual can express what their wishes are, what they want to invest in. If green investing is important, then let us help you to buy timberland and offset, the average footprint that you have in the world. An average investor has about 16 tons of pollution that they provide to the planet. So how do you offset that? Let you think about that. If that's not as important to you as thinking about equality in a company or minority investing, then let us think about that and shaping that investment and allowing you to do it on a customized basis is, I think, going to be one of the most important things, all the way down to the person that invests their first $5,000. So I think that's what we're all trying to do. And the momentum that's coming out of COP26 is a very, very good thing for the world. And this conference could not have better timing than the Monday right after. So very happy to be part of it.
Thank you very much, Mary. Let's go next to Mr. Lo Boon-Chye, who was in Glasgow, I believe, for COP26. Boon-Chye, what's your sense of the challenges towards the new prosperity?
Thank you, David. Glad to be part of this panel. It's been almost 2 years since the pandemic started. Most of us would not have expected to be living with an endemic COVID-19. And as Merit said, who would have thought that portfolios would have done well and we really recovered from the lows that we saw in March of last year. But looking back at what we've been through and where we are now, I would probably share 4 areas which I think may redefine our future or what the new prosperity will look like. So first would probably be resilience and trust. We were fortunate that the financial markets entered the pandemic in a position of strength. For us at the Singapore Exchange, leaning on Singapore's standing as a financial safe haven that's been built over different periods of crisis, we made our marketplace available and accessible at all times for participants to manage their risks and investment. Like every organization, Singapore Exchange had to adapt to the new normal. So we're taking a holistic approach to strengthen the resilience. The pandemic has also shown that market stress may be temporarily, but resilience and trust in an orderly and high quality market will really stand the test of time. Secondly, global markets have become more connected and far more complex. If we look at the financial crisis over the years, the current COVID-19 situation, it is clear that economies are more interconnected than before. And today we have deeper capital markets. In Asia, there's broader market participation, the search for growth, there's greater risk-taking and innovation. And that really calls for enhanced regulation. And I think in all of that, we saw global customers really looking for more Asian-centric risk management tools across different asset classes. And third, I would say digitalization. Well, technology through this pandemic has really continued to strengthen the liquidity skill and growth, and importantly, access to capital markets. And I think the new situation that we're going to look at is really the acceleration of digital transformation of capital markets in Asia. For one, the rising convergence between over-the-counter and listed derivatives market that could really generate greater costs and operational efficiency. And the fourth point that I would make is, as Mary said, ESG or sustainability. How companies ensure sustainable growth, I think will be important, will be key. Climate change is another major risk and disruptive force. So I think for market infrastructure, for exchanges, for the Singapore Exchange, we are at the unique position at the center of the market ecosystem, and Asia will need large amount of climate finance investment. And I think markets will respond and be ready to intermediate the large flows of capital that will be needed, and financial markets will play a role.
Thank you very much, Boon Chye. I think we're beginning to see a theme already with respect to ESG, the climate change navigation, and how much of any of this we can be in control of ourselves as factors. So I want to go next to Mario Greco, CEO of Zurich Insurance. Mario, you're sitting with risk and a bunch of other challenges, and perhaps more than anyone, you have to see through the crystal ball. So the new prosperity, where do we find it?
I wish I knew that. Thank you, David, and thank you very much for having us here at this summit. And Zurich is very proud of the work we're doing in Canada, and we look forward to continuing supporting the growth of Canada over the next years. Look, the past 20 months have been very tough everywhere in the world. We learned a number of lessons. For us, probably the most important one, as it was for many of our customers, is that prevention is more important than fixing the issues. And what we did during the lockdown, we launched new services based on prevention and avoidance of the events, which is quite a different approach compared to the past. How do we go now on prosperity, and what are the important things to remember? I mean, resilience has been mentioned already, and for us as insurers, for the job we do, resilience is the most important component of the future. Now, in order to create a resilient future, we still need to not lower the guard to COVID. COVID is not away, it's still around, but we still need vaccination. The percentage of vaccinated people, especially in the less developed country, is definitely too small. And if we don't fix that soon, it will create a further gap between the rich and the others, and that will definitely influence the resilience of the whole planet. The second thing is that we all care for demand, and we were so concerned 2 years ago about demand shocks that we forgot about supply, and now we're seeing a supply-driven inflation rise, which needs to be managed, and governments have the measures, have the opportunity to do that, but they should act soon and avoid that this makes the fiscal deficits and the public finances much worse than they are today. Climate change is the long-term challenge that we all have to fix. That is, we see that as an opportunity, and we think that a lot of actions have started and are producing effect, but much more is needed. We praise what Canada has been doing on, especially on pricing carbon. We think that's a very interesting way to approach the issue. What we see by serving our customers is that in absence of an approach to take account of the carbon cost, it will be very difficult to lead the transformation because the industries still don't have an incentive, an economic and financial incentive to work for a greener economy in their own camps, in their own activities. And Canada has been honestly very innovative, and we were impressed by the legislation of Canada. We have been launching a number of initiatives at Zurich on sustainability. we have been, I would say, quite innovative in reducing our carbon footprints. We work also on travel policies. We work on food and waste. We work on water consumption. But in fairness, insurance is not a heavy carbon business. And so we wanted to give our contribution and also to signal to our employees and customers that we're doing what needs to be done. But we do not own the solution. We can only work with customers on the solution. And then I like also to stress the point that the future of the recovery also depends on skills and individual behavior. We embraced working from home even before COVID. Our head office in Zurich was based 5 years ago on the idea that no more than 70% of people will be present every day. And we have it full since the summer. But we need to find a way to make this way of working with a number of people staying home every day as instructive, as creative, and as motivating as the old way of working has been. And we're working on that. We see that there are skills missing in today's environment. And so we've been working together with government and institutions on creating these skills. And we believe that each company should do that. And the final comment I'd like to make is that the most important lesson for us in the pandemic has been that government do not own the solutions to these issues, and private individuals and companies do not own it either. But if we got so far into the pandemic, it is because, in a way, we found a way to co-create the solution between individual efforts and public actions, and that should be probably the most important lesson to keep in mind to create a new prosperity for the future. That each one of us has to think that we own a piece of the solution, and we have to work to make that happening. I hope I wasn't too long. I'd like to stop here, David.
Thank you very much, Mario. No, not too long at all. And our final panelist, Dr. Fred Hu, in China, the founder and chairman and CEO, Primavera Capital. Fred, you have a lot of international experience. Where do you see the connection between China's common prosperity and the international open trade arguments that are going to increasingly come to the fore? Perhaps you can speak for a few moments to those issues as you do your introductory comments.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And glad to be here joining other speakers, Mary and Panchai and Mario. I actually agree most of the insightful comments already. Let me just add maybe two related points. One is inequality. The other is actually interrelated, technology, the role of technology. The pandemic really has laid bare and also in many aspects exacerbated the inequality problem in many countries. In part as government policy responses to manage the pandemic. So the central bank, QEs in particular, have supported the economic recovery, pushing stock markets to record highs, obviously benefiting the wealth and investors, including myself. But as we know, in economic inequality, at least in part, has contributed to increasing social polarization and the rise in populism in much of the world, democracy and non-democracy alike. So in response, as you noted, David, China has unveiled the so-called common prosperity, proclaiming to achieve more inclusive growth and more widely distributed prosperity. U.S. and other countries have faced strong pressures to increase tax on the rich and build a strong social safety net. The unappealing alternative is to let the national debt spin out of control to an even more unsustainable level. China, European Union, and the US have also attempted to varying degrees, with China by far the most proactive and forceful to tighten regulations and rein in the big tech, which has arguably benefited the most from the pandemic, as the pandemic accelerated the mass adoption of digital technologies from e-commerce to online education. So the question is, as we want to address inequality, but also, the new era of new prosperity. So what means, for technology? My view is very strong one. I actually believe, just like previous economic booms in history, the new prosperity will continue to be mostly driven by innovation and technological change. So we should therefore be very careful about over-regulation, not letting the current popular anger and the backlash against the big tech, however justified they may be, stifle entrepreneurship and undermine innovation. I believe very strongly technology change has been and will continue to be the vital engine of growth and prosperity.
Thank you, Fred. I'm going to stay with you. I think one of the main points that we're seeing here is that on the one hand, we've all come through the same storm of the pandemic, but we're all in different boats, and that economic inequality has been laid bare. It's obvious. Now, Primavera is very keen to build new markets. You're heavily involved in media, telcos, technology. You invest in education and healthcare as well. What is the new market that you're going to bet on? Where is the emerging market that you think over the next 5 years Primavera sees has the greatest potential from the lessons learned over the last 20 months?
So, David, we have been on the forefront of, last decade or so, in the transformative change that has taken place in China, the urbanization, rise of middle class, and really the spread of digital technologies, to the hands of ordinary people. So everything from e-commerce to entertainment, consumer of news, fintech, payments. So that has created enormous investment opportunities. So we, have been very active investing in those emerging tech champions who actually, bring technology to the masses, to the middle class, to consumers. So thereby, not only benefiting the users, but also creating enormous economic value. Now we see, following the foothills of China, Southeast Asia, the same is happening. In Indonesia, we can see, ride-hailing, food delivery, fintech, e-commerce, the emergence of super app. So very much we have seen in China, the decade before, maybe earlier. So definitely, I would say our focus has been the theme of emerging middle class and technology adoption in the mobile internet, AI, data analytics. So that I think despite the growing regulatory scrutiny and even a crackdown, that trend is here to stay because the benefits massively outweigh whatever the costs there may be. I think with sensible regulation, hopefully the tech sector will also behave better, to really continue to win the trust from the users, the public, and the regulators. So, there will be, kind of virtuous cycle. Innovation will continue, and society at large will benefit more and more from mass adoption of the cutting-edge technologies.
Thank you, Fred. Mary, I wanted to turn to you. You speak of the moral responsibility that you've got in terms of ensuring that the pensions that have been invested are intact, and that you're there for folk when it gets to that point of retirement. At the same time, we're obviously coming off an incredible run with the markets. They're doing historically well. There is, this is more me as an editor of a newspaper. Every day, the swirl of events makes me less certain than ever. I'm increasingly allergic to the very notion of certainty. Can you walk us through a little bit of where you see those pressure points and how you decide where to lay your bets based on what the longer-term financial market picture is likely to be?
It's a great question, and I just on the heels of some of Fred's comments about the emerging consumer technology changing things, the emerging middle class, and all that provides. Your comments about the swirl of the world and what changes every day. It's just, there's Moore's law is like out of date with how exponentially fast things change. And so that makes it super exciting, but it also makes the developed markets, which have had the strongest performance over the last year or so, be less interesting than everything that's about to happen in emerging economies. And we talked about the fact that vaccinations are not where they need to be in emerging economies, but they will get there. And we as a world will get vaccinations out to all these people and prevention medicines out to all these people. And when we do, all of the liquidity that's been pumped into the system from the European markets, from the US markets, Asian markets, Japanese markets, all of that liquidity will hopefully go somehow transitioning into the hands of these people who want to start new companies, who want to think about new things. And so technology enables lots of people to do lots of things that they never could before. And so for us, we're trying to figure out where that next horizon is. And all of our focus is on emerging economies. So we have lots of exposure to developed markets, but most people are woefully underweight emerging economies. And within emerging economies, they are woefully underweight China. We think it's a very important time to be thinking about all these markets across all of Southeast Asia up through China. There's tons of opportunities to think about it. And there's been some corrections with, as we talked about, Chinese government, U.S. government, people trying to think about not having the rubber band stretch so far between the top 1% and the bottom 50%. And so governments are trying to do the right thing here, and markets should participate in all that the governments are trying to do and think about where the puck is going for where these consumers are going to be able to increase their incomes by getting new jobs and the like. And so I think that's really important. And I think, one of the things that Boon Chai talked about was the trust and resilience. And I think a lot of what's happening today is really going to depend on whether we can engender that trust. And I think there is a whole portion of the world that we want to invest in, but who's listening to these conversations about work from home and things like that. And it's a complete disconnect from the world that they live in. If you work in any kind of manufacturing or service industry, there's no such thing as work from home. And so there starts to be sort of high class discussions and everybody else. And I think technology will help us to bridge those gaps, but the opportunities are massive if done the right way. And I think governments are really no different than all of us. We all went through COVID and had maybe more time to think about what's our purpose on life. How do we think about things? And that's no different than what governments are trying to do to equalize the way things are happening. And that's no different than investors trying to think about where should that next marginal dollar go that can make money for the end retiree investor, but also can do good in the world. And I think the convergence of those things is really, really exciting. And off of the heels of both COVID as well as COP26 and everything, I hope this momentum continues around the world. And I hope the forces for good continue to win out. So I'm really excited about all the opportunities. And quite frankly, I'm just excited about the world getting back to normal. And as the world continues to open up, everything that you've seen that's come bouncing back in places like Europe and the U.S. will hopefully, flow right across the world. And I think we could have a really great next couple of years here.
I love the optimism. Okay, we're gonna bottle that and we're gonna sell it. Bunchai, the perspective from Singapore, the superconductor chip shortage, the challenges around emerging markets, the opportunities for Vietnam and Laos, Thailand, and the manufacturing hubs there. What is your sense of this notion, as Mary says, return to work is a theoretical idea for those in the manufacturing side of things. Within Asia, what's the perspective as you come out of the pandemic and look to rebuilding the industries that you're so well known for?
Thank you, David. And also, let me acknowledge the various great points made by Fred and Mary. So to your question, first, I'm actually optimistic that Asia will continue to lead global growth, notwithstanding the chip shortages, the supply chain disruption. So in a post-COVID-19 world, optimistic around Asia leading the growth globally. And with what has been happening also in the capital markets, which has obviously deepened and continued to internationalize, I think will provide opportunities for many investors looking for the Asian growth. That said, I think the complexity of Asian markets, the idiosyncratic nature of risk return really means you need different tools, you need an efficient access into different asset classes. And then the point about liquidity was mentioned. So second, I think the low interest rate environment, notwithstanding the inflationary concerns lately, will continue and spur demand for growth. And then with technology that was mentioned, and also innovation in many parts of Asia. And in fact, right this week, we have the FinTech Festival in Singapore, and the amount of innovation that will cut across AI, deep tech, manufacturing, this I think bodes well. And last but not least, the growing demand in digitalization, and I mentioned earlier, where I see in terms of capital markets is the pooling of different liquidities into one. And I think that will enable a lower cost of access and better efficiency for investors. And also what I would say is not forgetting climate change. Just coming back from COP26, I'm actually optimistic. The capital is there. There is leadership being shown by the financial institutions. And I think this will be a key agenda going forward for global policymakers to really put us onto a path for net zero.
Okay, so 3 for 3 are optimistic. I always knew time would get us in the end. So I'm going to come to Mario, and you're sitting there with entire divisions of actuarial scientists and risk departments. Optimistic or pessimistic? Wary? Certain? What's your sense, Mario?
The actuaries are always absolutely sure of their numbers, so they're neither optimistic nor pessimistic. They never make mistakes, as they tell us. And then we discover that, the faith in actual projections is something that we should consider carefully. Look, I mean, we know what to do. I think this is what makes me quite optimistic on the future. We know what needs to be done, and we have demonstrated on the pandemic actions that we can be agile and implement things very, very fast and quickly. There is a lot that needs to be fixed, though, because many things are happening, as we were discussing already, at the same time. There is also stress on democracy and how the media world in a digital economy is impacting democracy is still something that we need to understand it better. And some of the challenges that we're seeing with COVID also have to do with our lack of capabilities to run democracy effectively in a digital society. And so it will be interesting to see also how the political systems progress and develop themselves over the next years. As an insurance company, we see lots also of opportunities with these changes. We see opportunities to engage with customers on prevention and avoidance of risks. We see opportunities in developing lines of businesses which have not been that popular before, like, for example, accident and health, which has always been a kind of a son of a lesser son for us before. But even property, which is at the center of the planet sustainability issues, is today even more interesting and full of opportunities than ever before, because people want to understand better how they can defend themselves from the risks and what's the role of insurance in doing that. So I share the view that we should be optimistic, and we are optimistic, but there is a lot to do. And the most important thing now is to act and speak loud and act together, because nobody can bring the solution alone.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Mary, Bunchai, and Fred. I'm going to pass it over now for closing remarks to David Rawlings, the CEO of JP Morgan Canada. David.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to the panelists for such insightful comments. The thing that I love about the Toronto Global Forum is it does bring together global perspectives on relevant topics and also focuses on the connection amongst all of us. And I think coming through this last 18 months, that connection piece for our employees, for our customers, for the communities in which we're operating is as important now as ever. I just had a couple of comments just to add, and then we'll wrap. So first of all, clearly we are in a time of transition, but as what was identified by Mary and others, the economic activity has actually rebounded in a pretty substantial way. Household balance sheets are, in developed markets, of course, are actually in quite good shape. And so while there are lots of imbalances around supply chain and this social and economic inclusion that I think both governments, but we think companies have a huge role to play over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years in normalizing some of those imbalances. So I think that the topics here today are certainly relevant to the way we think of the business and run the business. Appreciate the perspectives from Mary, of course, who is amazing, and my dear colleague, Bunchai, Mario, and Fred. And, we are committed to this journey, and I think all of us are committed to this journey. And then just going back to one of the things that I talked about at the beginning with the forum, this connection amongst participants is something that we love. So if we can be helpful in sharing our own perspectives on things you're dealing with, we'd love to be part of that. And likewise, we'd love to hear from some of the other participants around the forum of what you're dealing with, and so we can learn from you. So thank you to the organizers, and I hope everyone has a terrific conference.